The voice note was 43 seconds long. He knew this because after he realized what he had done, he sat in the parking lot of his daughter's school for 6 minutes, doing the specific kind of nothing that the human brain does when it has just made an error significant enough to require a complete pause of all non-essential functions while it calculates the damage. And in those 6 minutes, the 43 seconds played in his head on a loop, not as audio, but as the complete and perfect memory of what he had said, word for word, in the order he had said it, with full recall of the tone and the specific emotional texture of each sentence, which was the kind of total recall you get for things you desperately wish you could unremember. He had meant to send it to his friend Danny. Danny Okafor had been his best friend since high school, the kind of friend who existed in your phone as a shortcut. You didn't think about opening his contact, you just went there. The muscle memory of 15 years of daily communication having made the action as automatic as anything that automatic gets. Nathan and Danny talked every day, not always for long, sometimes just a voice note in the car, a 30-second update on whatever was happening, the verbal equivalent of a text that was easier to send than to type because Nathan's thumbs had never achieved the speed his thoughts traveled at. His daughter's name was Rosie. She was 7 years old, and she was standing outside the school doors with her backpack and her lunchbox and the specific expression of a 7-year-old who has been waiting the exact correct amount of time before the expression transitions from patient to aggrieved. And Nathan had been in the parking lot watching her come through the doors and had been in the middle of sending Danny a voice note that was supposed to be about Rosie. A funny thing she had said that morning, something about clouds that Nathan had been carrying around all day waiting to share with someone who would appreciate it, and he had hit send and looked up to wave at Rosie and looked back down at his phone and understood. The contact at the top of the thread was not Danny. The contact at the top of the thread was a name that appeared in his phone as CEO Meridian, because that was how his executive assistant had entered it when she set up the contact 6 weeks ago, when Nathan had been promoted from senior account director to VP of client strategy at the consulting firm where he worked, and the VP role was a direct communication line with Meridian Group's CEO, which was the firm's largest client. And the communication line had been established, and Nathan had saved the contact carefully, and then apparently the contact had lived near Danny's in the alphabetical order of his recent threads, and he had tapped one when he meant to tap the other. He had sent a 43-second voice note to the CEO of Meridian Group. Her name was Elena Park. She was, in Nathan's professional experience of the past 6 weeks, one of the most formidable people he had ever had a meeting with. Not formidable in a hostile way, not intimidating in the way of someone who used status as a weapon, but formidable in the way of someone whose intelligence was so quick and whose attention was so total that you were always, in her presence, aware that she was operating at a level that required your best thinking, or the conversation was going to be uneven in a way you'd feel. Nathan had managed in 6 weeks of direct communication with Elena Park to be professional and competent and to produce work that was genuinely strong and to say nothing that was not either accurate or necessary. And he had just sent a 43-second voice note that contained none of those things. Rosie knocked on the car window. He replayed the voice note in his head on the drive home, the way you do. It had started with the thing Rosie said about clouds, which was, "Daddy, do you think clouds ever get lonely? Because they're always moving and they never get to stay in one place, and I think if I were a cloud, I would feel very lonely except for the other clouds, which would be okay, but what if the wind blew them away?" He had said this to the phone, said it the way he said everything to Danny, with the full effect and the warmth and the specific delight he took in the things Rosie said, which were, in his honest assessment, frequently the most interesting things said to him in a given day, and his given days involved a significant amount of conversation with people who were paid to be interesting. He had said, "Listen to this, D. Rosie this morning, 7 years old, asked me if clouds get lonely. Clouds? She's worried about the emotional interior life of meteorological phenomena. I don't know what to do with this child. I genuinely don't. She's going to be either a philosopher or a meteorologist, and I think either one is correct. And I just—" He had paused, and what came next was the part he had replayed most often, the part that made the error feel specifically bad in the way that things are bad when they're not just embarrassing, but vulnerable, when they reveal something true that you hadn't meant to say out loud to the person who was now going to hear it. He had said in the specific voice he used with Danny, which was the completely unfiltered version, "I just love her so much it's stupid, D. Like genuinely stupid.
She asked me about clouds and I almost cried in the school drop-off line, which is, I can't do that, Danny. I'm a VP now. I have to hold it together. But she is the most remarkable person I have ever met, and I made her somehow, which makes no sense, and I just needed to tell you that. 43 seconds. He had told this to Elena Park, CEO of Meridian Group. He put Rosie to bed that night. Story, song, the specific negotiation about whether the hall light stayed on. It stayed on, it always stayed on. They went through the negotiation every night because Rosie considered it important to have the option, and then he sat on the couch and looked at his phone and ran through the available options. He could text an explanation immediately. He had, in fact, started 3 separate explanatory texts and deleted all of them because none of them had arrived at the correct register. Too formal felt strange given the content of what she'd heard, too casual felt presumptuous given who she was, and the middle ground between those 2 options was a tonal tightrope he had not successfully walked in 3 attempts. He could call. He held his thumb over her number for approximately 40 seconds before understanding that calling was genuinely worse, that to correct a voice note with a phone call was to add a second unsolicited audio experience to a situation that had already produced one, and that the symmetry of the errors suggested audio was not the medium in which he should be attempting the repair. He could email. Professional, appropriate, the correct channel for this relationship. He opened the email and got 3 sentences in before understanding that the email was going to be worse than the voice note, because the voice note had been accidental and human, and the email was going to be deliberate and apologetic, and was going to read at 3 sentences exactly as carefully managed as it was. He could do nothing. He sat with the doing nothing option for about 20 minutes. The doing nothing option had a specific and perverse appeal, which was that it required nothing of him and would allow him to find out whether Elena Park was the kind of person who treated an accidental voice note as a professional incident that required acknowledgement, or the kind of person who simply filed it in the category of things that happened when humans operated technology and moved on. The doing nothing option also had the significant downside of requiring him to walk into the next meeting with Elena Park, which was scheduled for Thursday, 3 days away, having no idea which kind of person she was, which would make the meeting difficult in a way that would almost certainly affect his performance in a meeting he needed to perform well in. He went to bed without sending anything. He did not sleep well. At 6:47 a.m. the next morning, while Nathan was making Rosie's breakfast and Rosie was explaining to him in considerable detail a dream she had had about a horse who could do mathematics, his phone buzzed. The notification showed a voice note from Elena Park. He put down the spatula, he picked up the phone, he looked at the notification for a moment in the specific way you look at something that you need a second to prepare yourself for. He put in one earbud. He pressed play. Her voice was the same voice he knew from meetings. Clear, measured, with the specific cadence of someone whose thinking was organized before the speaking started. But the register was different from the meetings. Not softer exactly, more human. Less the CEO voice and more the voice of a person who decided about this specific thing to respond in kind. She said, "Mr. Torres, I want to start by telling you that I have listened to your voice note 7 times, which I recognize as information you did not ask for, and that I'm telling you anyway because I think you deserve to know the effect it had." She paused. "I want to be honest with you about something. I received your message last night and my first instinct was to ignore it, to file it in the professional incident category and say nothing, which is what I would normally do. Because I run a large organization and I'm aware that the distance between my role and the people I work with is something that requires management, and that responding to an accidental personal voice note crosses that distance in a way that has implications I need to be careful about." Another pause. "But I've listened to it 7 times, she said. "And I think the honest reason I've listened to it 7 times is that it is the most true thing anyone has said in my vicinity in a very long time. Not the content specifically, the quality of it. The specific quality of someone who doesn't know they're being listened to, saying something they mean completely." She stopped again. "Your daughter asked about clouds. I think she's right that clouds are probably lonely. I think that's actually a very sophisticated observation about impermanence dressed up in 7-year-old language, and I think you're very lucky to be the person she says those things to." The voice note ended. 31 seconds. Nathan stood in his kitchen with one earbud in, spatula on the counter, Rosie still explaining the mathematical horse in the background, and felt something happen in his chest that he would not have been able to name precisely, but that was in the family of things that happen when a door you had not known was closed turns out to be, under the right circumstances, open. "Daddy?" Rosie said from the kitchen table. "Are you listening?" "Yes," he said. He was not entirely listening. He was listening to something else. "The horse did math." "The horse did calculus," Rosie said with the emphasis of someone for whom the distinction was important. "The horse did calculus," Nathan agreed. He picked up the spatula, he finished the eggs, he thought about 31 seconds and 7 times and the most true thing anyone has said in my vicinity in a very long time, and he thought about a 43-second voice note that he had spent the night treating as a catastrophe and that was apparently something else entirely. He sent a voice note back, not immediately. He thought about it for 3 hours, which was the amount of time it took from Rosie to school, drive to the office, sit at his desk, open 3 different work tasks, close 2 of them without making progress, and arrive at the understanding that he was not going to be able to do anything else of quality until he had addressed the thing that was occupying the part of his brain where the quality work was supposed to happen. He went to the conference room at the end of the hall, the one that was small and usually empty in the morning,
And he closed the door and he sat at the table and he thought about what he wanted to say, and then he stopped thinking about it and just said it, the way it had worked the first time, the way the accidental 43 seconds had worked, by not trying to manage it. He said, "Miss Park, Elena, I want to respond to your message, but I want to respond to it honestly, not in the version that's been managed into the appropriate professional register, because I think you'd hear the managing. And I think I'd rather say the true thing and risk the managing being absent." He paused. He thought about what the true thing actually was. "The true thing is that your message did something I wasn't expecting. I went to bed last night thinking the voice note was a professional disaster that I needed to manage, and I woke up this morning to 31 seconds that changed the category of the thing entirely. And I'm aware that you said you were being careful about crossing a distance, and I want to acknowledge that I'm aware of it too. You're the CEO of our largest client, and I'm a VP who has been in this role for 6 weeks, and the professional context is not something I'm planning to be careless about." Another pause, the careful pause of someone arriving at a thing they want to say correctly. "But I also think the clouds thing, Rosie, I think you understood something about that. Not as a professional observation, as a person who heard a thing and heard it 7 times because it meant something to them. And I think if you heard something in it, then there's a version of this conversation that could exist separately from the professional context in a way that both of us could be clear about and careful about, and I would like to have that conversation if you would." He stopped. He listened back to it. He pressed send before the listening back could become reconsidering. Elena Park was 43 years old. She had run Meridian Group for 6 years, having taken over from her predecessor at 37 in a transition that the board had considered at the time optimistic. She was young for the role. She was the first woman to hold it. She had opinions about the company's direction that were not universally shared by the people who had hired her, and that she had pursued anyway, with the patient consistency of someone who understood that being right about something and having the organizational space to act on being right were different problems that required different timelines. She had been right. The company's trajectory over 6 years was the evidence. She had also been, for most of those 6 years, almost exclusively the CEO of Meridian Group in the specific way that the role required, present in it completely, available to it in the ways that it demanded, which were ways that left limited room for the parts of a life that existed outside of what the company needed. She had not made this choice with full awareness of its costs in the early years. She had made it the way ambitious people sometimes made choices, which was by not quite making it, by simply finding each time that the professional thing was the thing that had to happen, and that other things were deferred, and that the deferral accumulated without being examined, until one day the examination arrived and the accumulation was larger than expected. She had been to dinner alone 3 times in the past month. Not working dinners, actual alone dinners with a book at restaurants where she had a usual table and was known and well treated, and where the evening had its own shape that she had built deliberately, because a deliberately shaped evening was better than an unshapen one. She was not lonely in the way that required rescue. She was lonely in the way that required honesty, which was different, and which she had been applying to her own situation with the same analytical rigor she applied to the company's, without yet arriving at a conclusion she was satisfied with.
into this specific context had arrived at 9:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, a 43-second voice note from a man she had been professionally impressed by in 6 weeks of client relationship management, saying that he loved his daughter so much it was stupid and that clouds might be lonely. She had listened to it 7 times.
The first time to understand what she was hearing, the second time to make sure she had understood correctly, the third time because there was something in the voice, in the unguarded, uncalculated quality of it, the absence of any management of impression, the rawness of a person saying a true thing to someone they trusted completely that she had not heard in a very long time, and that she was not ready to stop hearing after only twice. The fourth through seventh times were not analytical. They were the listening of someone who has found something that did not know they were looking for it. She had sent him the 31 seconds after the 7th time, because sending it was honest and not sending it was a kind of management she had decided by the 7th time she was not going to apply to this. His response came at 10:13 the following morning. She listened to it once. Then she sat in her office for several minutes, looking out the window at the specific way November light came through the buildings at this angle in the morning, and she thought about professional distance and about someone who had been in a role for 6 weeks and who had said the true thing without trying to manage it, which was the rarest quality she encountered in people who occupied the kind of professional positions he occupied, where everything was almost always managed. She thought about clouds. She thought about a 7-year-old who was worried about the emotional interior life of meteorological phenomena. She thought, this is not a complicated situation. There are 2 separate things here, a professional relationship that requires care and a personal something that also requires care. The caring about both of them simultaneously is not impossible. It requires honesty and clear-sightedness and the willingness to be explicit about the separateness rather than pretending the separateness will manage itself. She had been explicit about things her whole career. It was, she knew, one of her better qualities. She picked up her phone. His phone showed an incoming call at 11:47. Not a voice note, a call. He looked at the name on the screen. He was in his office, door closed, in the middle of a document he was not making progress on for reasons he was now fully aware of. He answered. "I want to say something directly," she said, without preamble, in the voice that was the CEO voice, and also, he was beginning to understand, simply her voice. Because some people were their professional selves and their personal selves simultaneously, in a way that was not performance, but just accuracy. "I think the separation you proposed, the professional context, and whatever else might be possible separately, is the right framework. I also think it's worth being explicit about what that means in practice, because I run a large organization and my relationship with your firm is the kind of relationship that a personal complication could affect in ways neither of us would want." "I know," Nathan said. "So here is what I'm proposing," she said. "We continue to be exactly as professional as we've been, which I think we're both capable of, because we're both capable people who understand what the professional relationship requires and why it matters. And separately from that, coffee, not as a client meeting, as 2 people who have exchanged voice notes about clouds and who think there might be a conversation worth having that doesn't belong in a boardroom." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Separately," he said. "Those 2 things. I am very good at keeping things separate when I've decided to. I've run a company for 6 years. Separation is something I have experience with." "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. "I should tell you something before Saturday." "Tell me, the voice note," he said. "The thing about loving her so much it's stupid. I want you to know that I'm the kind of person who talks like that to his best friend, unfiltered. That's not the version I usually present to clients." "I know," she said. "That's why I listened to it 7 times. The filtered version is what everyone presents. You weren't filtering. It was an accident," he said. "Most of the interesting things are," she said. "Saturday, 10 o'clock. Do you know a place called Wren on the east side?" "I'll find it," he said. "Good," she said. "I'll see you there." She hung up. Nathan put his phone down on his desk. He looked at the document he had not been making progress on. He opened it. He worked on it for the rest of the afternoon with a quality of focus that he had not managed all day, which was, he thought, the specific effect of something unresolved being resolved, the brain releasing the resources it had allocated to the unresolved thing and returning them to the available pool. He picked up Rosie at 3:15. She came through the school doors with the expression that meant a good day.
He had learned to read the specific micro-expressions of her after-school face with the accuracy of someone for whom reading this particular face was the most important skill he had. "Good day?" he asked. "Excellent," she said, with the precision of someone for whom good and excellent were different categories. "We talked about weather and science. Mrs. Morrison said clouds are made of water vapor, which I already knew. Did you learn anything new?" "I learned that clouds move because of wind patterns," she said, settling into the back seat with her backpack, "which explains why they can't stay in one place. Does that make you feel better or worse about the lonely thing?" Rosie thought about this with the seriousness she brought to meteorological ethics. "Better," she said finally. "It's not their fault. It's just wind. You can't be sad about wind." "No," Nathan said. "You can't." He drove. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did in November, going gold and flat in the way that was its own kind of beauty if you were paying attention, which he was, which he tried always to be. He thought about Saturday and about 10 o'clock and a place called Wren on the east side and a woman who would listen to a voice note 7 times and then sent 31 seconds back and then called at 11:47 and proposed a framework with the directness of someone who was very good at being clear about what she meant. "Daddy," Rosie said from the back seat. "Yeah, can I ask you something? Always, when you talk to Danny on the phone, what do you tell him about me?" Nathan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you always smile after. When you call Danny and talk about me, you smile like it's a good thing you're saying." "It's always a good thing," he said. She considered this. What kind of good thing? He thought about a 43-second voice note, about clouds and meteorological phenomena and loving someone so much it's stupid, and a woman in an office building who had listened to it 7 times and called it the most true thing in her vicinity in a long time. "The best kind," he said. "The kind where something is so good you have to tell someone about it or it's too much to carry by yourself." Rosie looked out the window at the November light. "Like clouds," she said. "If clouds could talk, they'd probably tell each other where the wind was taking them." Nathan drove. He thought, "She is 7 years old." He thought, "She is the most remarkable person I have ever met." He thought, "I made her, somehow." He did not say any of this out loud. He had learned from 43 seconds of evidence that sometimes the truest things were the ones you said when you didn't know you were being listened to. And sometimes, the best times, the listening was the thing that made them matter to more than just you. Saturday came with the specific quality of a November morning that had decided to be better than its reputation. Cold but clear, the kind of clear that made the city look freshly washed, the light doing the best available version of itself. He found Wren. It was on the east side, a narrow room with good windows and the kind of coffee that came from people who had thought carefully about what they were doing. He arrived 6 minutes early, which was his natural pace, and found a table by the window, which seemed right. She arrived exactly at 10. He stood. She looked at him across the room with the direct, assessing look that he had come to understand was not evaluation, but simply her natural way of receiving a situation, openly, fully, without the social buffer that most people maintained between themselves and a new experience. "Mr. Torres," he said. "Nathan, I listened to your voice notes 7 times. Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile, but the thing that preceded a smile, the internal shift that a smile was the external evidence of. "Nathan," she said. "Elena." She sat down. "Tell me something about Rosie." He looked at her. "Not the clouds," she said. "I know the clouds. Something else." He thought about it. There were approximately 10,000 things he could tell her about Rosie. He was aware of this, aware that the supply of Rosie material was effectively inexhaustible, and that most people were equipped to receive a limited amount before the volume required relationship equity he didn't yet have with them. He thought about to choose. She negotiates for everything. The hall light, what's for dinner, whether Saturdays count as school nights for bedtime purposes. And she negotiates with full awareness of what she's doing. She knows she's negotiating, I know she's negotiating, we both know the other knows, and she does it anyway because she thinks the process of the negotiation is worth having regardless of the outcome. "She's right," Elena said. "The process is where you find out what the other person actually values. The outcome is almost secondary." Nathan looked at her. "You understand that immediately." "I run a company," she said. "Everything is negotiation. The people who understand what the negotiation is actually for are the ones who get what they need." "She's 7, Nathan said. "She's ahead of schedule," Elena said. He laughed, the real kind, unfiltered, the one that came from something actually landing rather than social obligation. He had not laughed like that in a professional adjacent context in a while, and the feeling of it was its own information, about the ease of this, about the specific quality of sitting across from someone where the filtering was not required and the not filtering was not accidental, but was simply what the conversation was. They stayed at Ren for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He talked about Rosie and she talked about the company, and they talked about the professional relationship with the explicit care they both had committed to, drawing the line between that and this with the clarity that both of them by temperament found necessary, and then setting the professional line aside and staying on the other side of it for the remaining 2 hours. She told him that she listened to the voice notes 7 times because the last time she had heard someone talk about a person the way he had talked about Rosie was, she paused, choosing the honest answer over the easy one, longer ago than I want to admit. There's a specific quality to watching someone love a person that much. It does something. I wasn't expecting it at 9:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't expecting to send it to you, he said. No, but you did, and now here we are. She looked at the window, at the November clear. I think accidents are sometimes the most accurate version of a decision. The thing you weren't careful enough to prevent is the thing you actually wanted. He thought about
Danny's contact and the alphabetical proximity of recent threats. He thought about Rosie and clouds and a spatula on a counter. I want to tell you something, he said, that I haven't said since the voice note. Tell me. She asked me last night what I say about her to Danny. She said she knew it was good because I always smile after, and I didn't know how to answer her because the honest answer is that what I say about her to Danny is the version of myself I can't say anywhere else, the unfiltered version, the one that admits she's too much to carry by myself. Elena looked at him. You said it to me, she said quietly. I said it to you, he said, and you listened 7 times, and I think that's the most honest introduction I've ever made of myself to another person, even though it wasn't the wrong contact, and even though the professional context makes the whole thing. The professional context, she said, is manageable. I told you I was good at keeping things separate. She held his gaze with the level directness that was simply her. The other thing, the introduction, the unfiltered version, the too much to carry alone thing, that's not manageable. That's what I listened to 7 times. I'm not interested in managing that part. Nathan looked at her across the table in Ren on a November Saturday with the good coffee and the window and the clear light outside doing its best. He thought about a 7-year-old who asked about the emotional interior life of clouds and whether they got lonely, and who had concluded that you couldn't be sad about wind because it wasn't the cloud's fault. He thought, she is always right about these things. He thought, I should have led with the clouds. Elena, he said. Nathan, she said, I'm going to have to tell Danny about this, the actual Danny. He's going to consider it the best thing that's ever happened to a voice note. She laughed, full and real, the laugh of someone who hadn't expected it and was glad to be surprised. Tell him the CEO listened to it 7 times. He's going to want to know what you said back. Tell him I said clouds are probably lonely and that I think the 7-year-old is right. If you have ever said the truest version of yourself to the wrong person and had them turn out to be the right one, this story is for you. The accidents are sometimes the most accurate decisions. The thing you weren't careful enough to prevent is sometimes the thing you most needed to say. Drop a comment and tell us your best accidental message story. We read every single one. Subscribe for more stories like this every week. We'll see you next time.